It seems like the Republican delegates are facing a bit of a decision. On one hand, Kristina Karamo has the majority support, having been elected by 58% of the delegates. On the other hand, Pete Hoekstra has a specific number, 54 delegates, backing him. In good faith, the delegates elected Kristina Karamo, chair of the Michigan Republican Party. The attacks on Kristina began the minute she was elected. Who is Pete Hoekstra? Who does Pete Hoekstra represent? The status quo. The oligarchs, the deep state, the military-industrial complex, the never-Trumpers, and the election fraud deniers. Is Pete Hoekstra a bad man? No, he is not. He is simply a tool of the moneyed interests, the deep state, and the military-industrial complex. Do you like the forever wars? Pete Hoekstra is your man. The establishment does not believe people should choose their own leadership. Why does the establishment fear Kristina? For this, we must look at the history of our great nation. The indigenous peoples of North America lived in a decentralized manner, with no formal central government. Their societies often operated on communal principles, with decision-making occurring at the local level. In terms of economic systems, bartering and communal resource sharing were common practices. There wasn't a concept of private property, and individuals often lived off the land, relying on hunting, fishing, and gathering. Columbus discovered America in 1492. Just 115 years later, in 1607, England had its first permanent colony in America, at Jamestown. And America had a central government and a king. By 1776, Americans had had enough of the king. A revolution was started, and the king's armies lost. A republic was formed. The idea of rights coming from God, and the population choosing its leaders, was new and exciting. History tells us that republics always turn into democracies. Essentially, mob rule. Where everyone votes, including dead people, people who move out of the area, grandma in a coma in the hospital, 100 made-up people, living in an empty lot, every one of these votes must be counted. And these corrupt democracies become oligarchies. An oligarchy is the rule by the people who know how to work the system. It is important to have the ability to rig elections. Friends in government make it possible for all wealth to end up in the hands of the few. Take a look at the numbers. This is a graph of the average net personal wealth of all Americans. The arrow is pointing at the point President Nixon took the country off the gold standard. The blue line represents the bottom 50% of all Americans' average wealth. The red line represents the average wealth of the top 50 to 90%. The green line represents just 9% of the population, the average wealth of the top 90 to 99%, and the purple line represents the average wealth of the top 1% of all Americans. If we look at the data on a pie chart, the top 90 to 99% has 16.52% of the wealth. The top 1% has 81.74%. The total for the top 10% is 98.26% of all wealth in America. We need to know how this happens. Let's take a look. Article 1 of the American Constitution is where we find the enumerated powers of the federal government. Section 8 says, "The Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof." From the founding until 1935, the value of money was set at $18.92 equaled 1 ounce of gold. In 1935, the value of gold was reset to $35. Section 10 describes what money is. Section 10 says, "No state shall make any thing but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts." Note that it does not say anything, it says any thing. The powers of the federal government are limited to Article 1 of the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution does it authorize the printing of fiat currency. By 1913, America had become the richest country in the world. With just 6% of the world's population, America was producing 21% of the world's GDP. America did this because of limited government, freedom, no income tax, and sound money, backed by gold. On Friday, the 13th August of 1971, President Nixon put a curse on the American people and handed the country over to the oligarchs.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
On Friday the 13th August of 1971, America was given unconstitutional fiat currency. In 1971, the price of gold was set at $35. Today's date is February 26, 2024. The price of gold is $2,043.21. That means the dollar has lost purchasing power of 98.29%. Let us look at some simple examples of how fiat currency makes the rich richer, as the middle class shrinks and the poor become more dependent on government handouts. The purchasing power of fiat currency declines the more that is printed. The purchasing power of wages declines as asset prices such as stocks, bonds, and real estate rise. This is a simple wealth transfer from the working class to the rich. Let's look at minimum wage. In 1971, the minimum wage was $1.60 per hour. A 40-hour week would produce $64. The price of gold was $35 per ounce. A minimum wage worker could purchase 1.83 ounces of gold. Today, the price of gold is $2,043.26 per ounce. Times 1.83 ounces equals $3,739.27. Divided by 40 hours to equal $1.60 in 1971. The minimum wage would have to be $93.48 per hour. The average person is going to say, "That's ridiculous. It can't be true." We must understand that gold is a hedge against inflation. The value of gold is not rising. The value of fiat currency is declining. The more they print, the less valuable it becomes. The welfare warfare and foreign aid state is one giant money laundering scheme. As George Carlin said, George said, "They are coming for your Social Security." If you look at the numbers, it looks like they already got it. Let's take a look. In 1971, the average Social Security check was $132.17. The gold price was set at $35 per ounce. If paid in gold, instead of gold-backed money, it would have been 3.78 ounces. At today's gold price of $2,043.21, it would have been worth $7,715.74. The average Social Security check in 2024 is $1,762.52. That would buy 0.86 ounces of gold. 0.86 is a long way from 3.78 ounces a 1971 Social Security check would have bought. The United States, with its rigged elections, corrupt courts, corrupt politicians, and funny money system, is producing a gap between the rich and poor that is reaching banana republic levels. You know what you get in a banana republic? You get revolution. And most of you won't survive a revolution. Kristina Karamo is a little cog in the wheel. And the powers that be, the people who really run this country, can't take the chance of letting it happen. We all know who Pete Hoekstra represents. Kristina Karamo represents the people. Change is coming. It's mathematically impossible to keep going the way it is. Your vote on March 2nd could be a new beginning, or the final straw that begins the end.
Since the beginning of time, a war between good and evil has been taking place. All that evil needs to prevail is for good people to do nothing.